Okay, hello everybody and welcome to this Noon Book Club. I'm Eleanor, Eleanor Mills, the founder of Noon, and we're delighted to have with us today Helen Paris, who has written a lovely book called Lost Property, which a lot of you will have been reading, and which I have to say I found incredibly moving. I found myself kind of wiping away tears at rather a lot of moments, and also really kind of gasping with recognition and thinking, yes, I've noticed that kind of thing too. There was a bit about a tree, an apple tree that had been sitting kind of watching kind of what was going on, and I'd had a really similar thought about an oak tree that I happened to come across in the wood the other day, and that sense of it having been there enduring, and what was it seeing. So there were so many things that I loved in this book and that I really kind of cathected as I went through it, and I'm sure lots of you really did as well. So I'm really looking forward to discussing this with Helen, and we were just having a good chat before everyone came on, which was to talk about her next book, which has got lots of juicy, very good new topics about kind of friendship and intergenerationality. So we'll come into all of that in a minute too. So it's very nice to see lots of you this evening. I really hope you've enjoyed the book. Now I know people kind of keep on dribbling in, which is slightly why I'm waffling on. But for those of you who've just joined us, this is the Noon Book Club. I'm Eleanor Mills, and we'll be discussing today this lovely book, Lost Property, by Helen Paris, who is joining us this evening. So as is customary at these events, I'm going to begin by asking Helen to read us a little bit of Lost Property, so that those of you who haven't read it or who are maybe a bit of the way through it can get a bit of a sense of it, and then we'll go on into discussion. And please put your questions in the chat. We're always really delighted to hear from you. This is a book club which is very much about interactivity, and we want you to be very much part of the conversation that we're having. So fire your questions away. We haven't got Jen today. We've got Cersei standing in for Jen, she's going to be brilliant. And so Helen, take it away. Welcome everybody.
Thank you so much. It's so lovely to be here. I've really been enjoying the book club, so I'm really so happy to be part of it. And I would really love to read you a little bit of Lost Property. I think this is about 3 or 4 minutes, so it's just enough time for you to snuggle in a little bit. It's from the very beginning of the book, where we first meet the protagonist, Dot Watson, who works in Lost Property in London's Baker Street. It's seasonal loss. Outside, autumn rain buckets down full force. Inside, a deluge of brollies all need logging and labelling. We're jam-packed in customer service. A damp line of people queue the length of the counter, steam gently rising off woolen coats, seeking temporary sanctuary in Lost Property, in search of what they've lost or delivering what they've found. I'm sitting at the far end of the counter, tagging the lost umbrellas, whilst Anita deals with customers. Though when I look over, she's rootling through her bag as per. "Bugger, where's my pen?" she says. Staff possessions are strictly prohibited from the public area. "It's in here somewhere." She digs deeper into the vast recesses of her handbag, a large flank of matted brown and white suede. It is permanently attached to her, clanking her bits and bobs around like Marley's ghost. Whenever I look at Anita, she's elbow deep in that bag, as if birthing a cow, forever groping for one of her Slimmers bars or a squirt of perfume. I have considered suggesting she might be better off with something smaller. A buckled satchel, perhaps. I'm always picking up after her. Scarf left in the ladies, hairbrush abandoned on the counter. "Tired, Dots. Lose my head if it wasn't screwed on." Indeed. I unclip my second best chafer from my jacket pocket and I hand it to her. "You're a doll," she says, and returns to her customers. I am no such thing. And I hold little hope of the chafer returning to roost, which is disappointing, as it's new, a present to myself for my birthday. When she first started working at Lost Property, I asked Anita what had drawn her here, seeing as it's clearly a challenge to keep hold of her own things, let alone other people's. I told the job centre all my skills, she confessed over a frothy coffee at the Italian next door, firing 2 white pellets into her mug from a small tube retrieved from her commodious bag. Showed them my cosmetic certificate and my business plans, and they sent me here. What about level 3 diploma in nail services makes them think I'd be good at dealing with people's crap every day? She's been here almost as long as I have now, unlike the others who come and go. Anita stayed. Perhaps the nails never worked out. She didn't say, and it's not my place to ask. We've all had our dreams. When I was young, I longed to be a librarian. I've often sought sanctuary in the quiet order of the public library, delighting in the assured way the librarian splayed my book open, the crinkle of the cellophane jacket. Most of all, I love the confident stamp of the date and the soft slither of the pink ticket leaving the cardboard pocket, knowing the librarian would keep it safe in her file till I returned. They've closed most of them now, the libraries, and lost property was the right place for me after all. We are the repository for all the items left on London's buses, black cabs, tubes and trains. We get hundreds of items a day. Loss never stops. It's reliable like that. And the hours are good. Occasionally we have to go on Transport for London away days to stare at flip charts and listen to lynx-doused lads in their micro machine washable suits say, "Not a problem," ad infinitum. What do they know of the intricacies of lost property, of loss and its myriad problems? With them, it's all staff development and recruitment. Mind you, we do rather well with recruitment. Recruitment is not a problem. It's an endless procession of temps, students mostly passing through, just wanting a pay packet and a job in the city. Whatever the employment agency finds them will suffice. I applied. You see, I know about loss. I know its shape, its weak spots, its corners and sharp edges. I have felt its coordinates. I have its name sewed into the back of its collar.
Thank you, Helen. Well, how beautifully written. There's lots of people on the chat thinking that they're all clapping. They're saying fabulous reading. What a wonderful, clever woman. And doesn't she read beautifully? So it's a good start, I'd say.
No, thank you.
A strong start. So I think that really is a very good extract to choose, of course, because I think that it really is about loss, this book. And there are really, I said on the chat, it really made me cry. And I'm sure it did that for other people too, because I think it's so finely drawn. And I thought what I really loved about it, I think, was that sense of how we realised how blind we've been. And I thought as an authorial, as a narrator, your the deftness with which you tell the story and reveal Dot's own blindnesses was really, really very well done.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
I think that's really true. So I wanted to know a bit. I was reading up a bit about you, and it says that you spent a bit of time in the lost property office. So how did that come about? And tell us, what it was like. I assume it's kind of as described in the book, but tell us kind of how you ended up being there and some of the things that you saw.
Oh, that's a lovely question. Thank you. Yes, so I've been a theatre maker all my life, and so I was doing research for a performance piece about loss. And so I thought, I'd really like to explore loss in terms of the materiality of loss, like actual objects. So, and I've always been quite curious about the lost property department on Baker Street. Maybe it's partly to do with, 221B and Sherlock Holmes and all that sort of the mystery and sort of the clues and that sort of aspect of it. So I went and I worked there for a week, sort of shadowing the staff, and they are dealing with all of the loss that's coming in, and it is from the cabs and the trains and the buses, all the stuff that's handed in, and people coming in and handing stuff, and people coming in and looking for stuff. And it was an extraordinary place to be on so many levels. One, of what goes on over the counter as people describe their lost objects, and I became sort of absolutely entranced with the whole textual and gestural language of loss, as people would stand at the counter and they would sort of mime out the lost shape of their bag or of their teddy or of their scarf, and try so these ghosted presences. And I was also really drawn to the care and attention that was paid by the lost property staff, that that value was apportioned equally. So whether it was an iPhone that had been lost, or whether it was a teddy with one eye and half its stuffing missing, so this level of care, this attention being paid, this sort of, that value it's absolutely equal. So I loved that sense of care, and that really stayed with me. And then, so that's all happening upstairs. But then if you go downstairs in Lost Property, there are these huge cavernous basements, this sort of library of loss. And there are all these just sort of collisions of objects that have ended up sort of being strange bedfellows with each other. And the thing about working there, I think if I hadn't gone there, I could have imagined, the things that would have been, I could have imagined the shopping bags and the shopping trolleys and maybe the walking sticks, but I could never have imagined the other things like the Chinese typewriter, or the 200 weight of sultanas, or the 2 urns sort of down there filed under miscellaneous. So it was an extraordinary place to be. But also the very ordinariness of these objects, but just all curated together, almost like being in a museum or a gallery. And then each object has got, each little lost object has got a yellow, like a mustard yellow tag attached to it. So visually, it was really stunning. So all of this really made an impression on me. So I did the art project, I did the piece on loss, but that place and that level of care and attention being paid, and those conversations about loss just stayed with me. And I hadn't written a piece of fiction before. All the performance work that I've written has been sort of more autobiographical, but I thought, oh, now that is a nice setting for a story. And as a theatre maker, I'm always drawn, to settings. That set is often the first place I start when I'm making a piece of work, and that could be a theatre, but it could be.
Yes. So tell us a bit more about your other work. I'm intrigued by this. So you have a theatrical background, do you?
Completely. So everything that I had done up until sort of mid-age is and still continues to be making theatre, and that's what I've done. And a lot of the times that theatre is site specific, so it can happen in the theatre, but it can happen in a redwood forest, or it can happen in a ex-communist building in Shanghai, or it can happen in a boat on the canal in London, or it can happen, so it takes up residence in all sorts of places. And the setting.
And what kind of pieces do you put on? Do you direct or produce? Do you act? What do you do?
All of it. Oh,
okay.
It's run by myself and my partner. We've run it for 25 years, and it's called Curious. And we called it Curious because we're curious about the world that we live in, and because each project starts with a question. So, for example, we did a big project about smell and its relationship to memory and emotion. And I think that also sort of has a pattern in Lost Property as well, all that work with smell. So we went and worked with some biological scientists in Bangalore in India who work with smell and what happens to the brain when we smell something and how it takes it to that place of memory and emotion. So that was a piece that ended up taking place in a house. And so audience members would come to the house, because so many of our connections with smell tend to be to do with home. We remember our home, we remember our grandparents' house. We have really strong, quite nostalgic memories to do with home. So yes, so setting has always been important. So I think that setting of the Lost Property office was something that really lingered, and then I needed the story, and I didn't get the story until I got my protagonist Dot Watson's voice, and then when I got her voice, the story sort of came from that.
And I'm always interested in how characters arrive. I mean, I'm trying to write some fiction myself, not nearly as eloquently as you are, and I find it really difficult. But it's funny how some characters, just writers describe this, and you think, oh, it's absolute nonsense, that'll never happen to me. How a character just comes into your head fully formed, and I've had that happen to me quite a few times. I'm just like, well, where on earth has this person come from? It's really weird, and they become quite insistent. They might start as a peripheral character, and they're like desperate to be born, a bit like a kind of baby deciding it's getting out. And so I'm interested to know what's Dot's kind of genesis.
No, it's fascinating, isn't it? And it really is that thing about, so I felt like with Dot Watson that she was tapping me on the shoulder. It was like, come along, let's get this sorted. And she's absolutely, and she presented herself fully formed in this felt uniform and her Schaefer pen. and the special sort of words that she likes to say in her sort of idiosyncrasies. And I've listened to writers talking about characters coming, and I was thinking, man, that sounds so fantastic, you know, that would just come to you. But that really is what happened with Dot. And I actually couldn't, even though I had all this lovely material, this lovely setting, I couldn't get the story off the ground. I was trying all these different ways. I had third person, but it wasn't until I went first person and I had this voice, and who knows where it comes from. I think if I try and thread it back, I go back to those over-the-counter exchanges, and I go back to that delivery of care and of attention being paid. So I wanted a character that would really pay attention, and that for all her sort of idiosyncrasies and her sort of oddballness, and I have to say, I do love an oddball female character. I just love it. I love reading about them, and I relished writing her. But for all the oddballness of Dot, she is someone that pays attention, and I think that was a real driving force in where her voice came from. I love that line from Death of a Salesman, you know, when Linda says to Willie, you know, about Willie Loman, attention must be paid, and it's such a beautiful line, you know, and I think it's a very strong line, and it has a lot of, for me, it has a lot of it's like a mantra. I think, yes, we must pay attention to what's going on, to the world that we're living in, you know, and Dot pays attention, and I think a lot of her character comes from that paying attention.
And I think a lot of the richness of the book comes from the attention to detail. I mean, it's funny, isn't it? Some books you read and they don't really have very much detail at all. I was thinking about it, but this book feels to me kind of, you know, lovingly layered with detail, whether it's the kind of tea or the kind of smell. I particularly remember the tea because I'm a big lapsang. I'm a lapsang fan too. My children hate it. They think it smells like smoky bacon, and they can't believe that I want to drink it. But my mum loves it too. So I think there's a secret strain of lapsang tea drinkers. So I was pleased to see that. But it wasn't just that. I think maybe the theatricalness of your own background. It's almost like every scene in this book has been dressed. You kind of know what you are or where you are or what the kind of key details are. And I don't think that that's true of all writers. But I also like the kind of vagueness about, I don't think we're ever told Dot's exact age. There's no direct description of her. You kind of hear about her hair, but you don't really have a sense of whether she's, you know, kind of fat or thin or tall or short. She's just kind of in her body, and I like that wasn't a kind of a lot of books with a female protagonist. You get quite a lot of that kind of noise about their physicality, and I quite like the fact that you kept us guessing.
I'm so glad you said that, because it was a bit of a risk, but my the commissioning editor said, you know, why don't you just take the freedom to do that, because I hadn't been putting in age, and I felt very liberated by it, because I do feel that, particularly with women, because it's like the age when it's like, well, she can still have children, she can't have children, all of these things come into play. And I just wanted you to meet Dot and sort of draw your own conclusions, and you can make sense of it, you know, you can sort of track it back and you can work out what her age is, but I wanted you to find it for yourself, or for it not to matter, you know. I wanted you to find Dot.
I think it's more that sense that's not really how she's defining herself, that in some ways it doesn't matter how old she is in her life, where she is lost. You know, it's profoundly, terribly, you know, sorrowfully lost, and the frustration of that. And as the reader, you keep thinking, oh no, don't go back to that kind of, you know, that dreary job with that horrible boss. You know, you're obviously, the attention to detail shows the intelligence, shows the, you know, the erudition, the kind of the sophistication of her mind and the way that she's thinking about things. And yet there's obviously something, even before you begin to unfurl what's happened to her and all the tragedy, you can sense that this is a person who's you know, crippled with pain, and that's why they can't manage anything more than what they're doing at the moment.
Yeah. Absolutely. And that attention to detail, it's her strength, but in some ways it's also a weakness, or in the sense that she's vigilant about cataloguing the items because she wants to reunite person with property. That is her raison d'etre, but really, as we learn, it's about trying to ameliorate the loss in her own life, which is a chasm of loss, which we find out about.
And it's almost as if by caring for all these kind of random strangers who've come in and who've lost something, she can try and almost kind of heal her own. It's almost, it's like she wants the world also maybe to kind of pay attention to her own loss, or to kind of look after her And I think it's often the case, isn't it, with people who desperately need something themselves, they do it for other people.
Yeah.
It's one of those things I often notice.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that happens right at the beginning of the book. And so what sort of the driver for the book is an old gentleman, Mr. Appleby, comes in, and he has left his holdall on the number 73 bus. And it's got various things in it. But the reason that he has schlepped over to Lost Property in Baker Street is because what's in it, and that what he wants to get back, is this empty, small woman's lilac purse that belongs to his late wife. And he wants it back because it is, in that way that objects are, it is sort of a mnemonic, it is a totem, it is his portal back to her. And it's one of the things that I love about objects. I love how objects are used in theatre, like how someone like Pina Bausch would use objects. I love sort of the power and potency of objects. And I love how we imbue them with so much memory and connection, particularly to people, you know, and how, you know, it's that thing about, I think it's like tactile memory. When you hold an object that belonged to somebody, it almost conjures them back. It almost lets you time travel back to them, you know. Like I know my mum is still with me, but she has this sewing basket and I see the shape of it. But when I see the shape of the basket, I start to see her hands opening it, taking the lid off, and I see her face looking down in it. So the whole person is conjured up. And that's what happens with this little, what this purse is for Mr. Appleby. He wants to get it back because it is this portal back to his wife. It reminds him of her. He can see her opening it. He can see the way she would open it. And that's exactly what Dot connects with. She has her dad's pipe. That is her own totem. That is her own portal. And it's sort of her way of sort of time traveling back to him, the smell of the cherry tobacco. She talks about following a man all the way to Marylebone, you know, just because it's not that tobacco. And we know that, don't we? We know that with a, you know, when we smell a lover's perfume, when we're not with them anymore, when we follow, you know, all that, how that gets us in the gut. And so she has that connection. So I think absolutely, as you're saying, she sets off to find that little lilac snap purse because she ultimately wants to find herself, because she's absolutely lost in her own life.
Yeah, and it's the total kind of immersing herself in the detail of other people's losses. It's almost like an anesthetic for her own for a while, isn't it?
Yeah.
Or that by organizing them, she can somehow kind of ameliorate kind of what's happened to her. What about loss in your own life? I mean, we know we've just done a big piece of research on, we call our midlife women queenagers, which I think is a good rebrand of the. As a journalist, I always like a kind of a new moniker, but I think queenagers is good because it feels really optimistic.
It's glorious.
So we've just done this big piece of research which shows that basically by the time, we all know this, and this is, we don't do research studies, but by the time you get to 50, pretty well you've been battered a bit, haven't you? You've lost some people that you love, you've kind of you had your heart broken a few times, you lost some things that you thought you wanted, you've had to pick yourself up and, you know, recreate yourself. And I think that's that I really like this as a theme in the book, and how you go through that time and can come through it. So what I was interested in, maybe if there were particular losses of your own that informed it.
Well, one of the things that I really wanted to write about, because the book does talk about all kinds of losses, it's sort of layered with loss, and it can be the most innocuous loss, like the sort of loss of a button, that kind of loss, but the most everyday loss, and then the most epic loss, you know, which of course is the loss of a loved one. One of the storylines I wanted to deal with was loss of memory through dementia. And that was really important to me. And I knew it was really important to get right, because as you say, at this time, at midlife, if you haven't encountered loss, it is coming for you. You know, if you're not in that big way, big epic loss, it is coming. It is Sniper Alley. It is coming at you. And I think one of the things that is for my friends, something that a lot of my friends are dealing with is parents having dementia, and that shift in that relationship, that extraordinarily vulnerable and painful shift in the relationship, when a parent gets dementia and the relationship has to shift, and how you find the vocabulary and a way to do that. And at the time that I was writing lost property, that it wasn't my experience, but it was something that I really wanted to write about and do justice to. I read this absolutely beautiful book by Wendy Mitchell called Somebody I Used to Know, which is this bold, brave, just a completely glorious account of her own journey into dementia. It's an amazing, amazing piece of work. But since I've written the book, I do have an own experience of it. My mum is now dealing with dementia, and she's dealing with it really sort of brilliantly.
Oh, sorry.
And with a lot of humour, but and it's just that, it's just so hard. And so it was an important thing to me, for me to get right at the time. And it's just this sort of strange sort of echo of current sort of present life. But it was important to get right. And a lot of readers who have generously responded to me about the book have talked about that story, and have talked about really having to deal with that and dealing with it on a level as it is in the book, where the parent can no longer recognize their child, and how painful that loss is, that living loss is. And I've really appreciated them speaking to me about it, and also that they have really felt that the book has done due diligence and service to that, and that was, like I say, incredibly important to get right.
Yeah, no, and it's something that we all hear about, a lot. In fact, I've just been reading today an incredible article written by Kate Muir, who's writing about her mum's dying of Alzheimer's, but also there's amazing new science which is going to be what's come out of America, it will be released next week, about the links between Alzheimer's and women, particularly. I think 75% of Alzheimer's sufferers are women, and they always used to think that was because women lived longer than men, therefore they were more likely to end up with it. But new brain science out of America shows that actually it's to do with the way that estrogen operates in the brain. And in some cases, in some of the studies in America, 80%, you can if you take HRT, your chance of getting Alzheimer's is 80% less. And that's something that, I feel so cross about that. I think that should be on every single bus. You can read Kate's piece about it next week. It's all part of this new Davina McCall documentary about menopause, which is coming up. But I think that the stuff about brain science, and the fact that a whole generation of women were told kind of not to take HRT, when actually it can be an absolutely key part of preventing you getting dementia and Alzheimer's, which particularly hits women. It all makes sense. I think if that's going to turn out to be a real scandal. So, you heard it here first. It's really, really, really shocking. And have a look for Kate Muir's piece, which will be up kind of next week. Sorry, that's a bad plug. But what I mean is that it's a hugely important topic, I think, for women in midlife to understand what's going on in our brains in terms of estrogen and these kind of things, but also what it's like to have to care for and deal with somebody in that situation. And I think it's incredibly important that people like you and Kate write about the reality of that, because it's like any situation in life, isn't it, when you suddenly go into it and you've got no idea about what's coming or any tools to deal with it. I had a child who was quite ill at one point, and just suddenly finding yourself in that place and having to kind of deal with it. I wish that I'd read, more about what to do. And I think that this book will act as a kind of beacon, or even as some ideas about how to cope for people when they're in that situation.
Well, I really appreciate what you're saying about. I've been following Kate Muir and Davina McCall, and also the work of like Louise Newson and her clinic. All the work that they're doing in terms of menopause information and education, because we have been absolutely deprived of it. But I do think that our generation, this sort of generation of women, are sort of pioneers. They are really. There has been so much work laid down before us by all the women before us, and now we are picking up the baton, and we are sort of at the front line, I think, with this menopause work, because it's extraordinary how, seeing Davina McCall slapping on a testosterone, in some way it feels revolutionary to see that, and in another it feels like this is our hormone too.
Yes.
But why do you have to pay 80 quid for it? It's
No,
just everything.
that's got to change. I went to a screening for the new program last Monday, so I was sitting next to Davina, and there was a big discussion with a lot of quite high-powered ladies there, and I said that this is a political campaign. Every single woman in the country should be writing to their MP saying what the main doctor there said is that this whole thing about HRT and the hormones that we need should be what's called a quaff, which is one of the things that doctors, GPs have to do. So, we all get called in for breast screening, we get called in for cervical cancer, but we don't get called in for menopause. And they're saying that every GP should be paid by the number of women that they get in, and they test their hormones and they give them the HRT, particularly if you look at the billions that dementia and Alzheimer's are costing the health service. If that can be fixed earlier on by also making women happier in midlife and giving them the chemicals they need, if they can take them. I know that some people who've had breast cancer can't take estrogen, but they can take testosterone. A friend of mine who's had breast cancer has just started taking testosterone. I've never seen her so happy. It's like a massive shift. But I think it's terrible that there's so much massive disinformation around about this, and that the government and the NHS doesn't provide it. But it's up to us as queenagers, as the first generation of women, to get to this point, to really say we deserve this. We're worth it.
Absolutely. These are our hormones, and we want them and we need them. And if they were, blood pressure tablets, we would be getting them. I mean, so many people are having to go private in order to be seen. So it's just.
There's someone saying on the chat, and they're totally right, many GPs don't have a clue about menopause. That's totally right. They don't get any formal training on menopause. Most of them get maybe half an hour kind of in their entire GP career. Dr. Nigat, who's our advisor on Noon, is absolutely up in arms about this. She's trying to lobby to get this change, but it's also because medicine is a massively paternalistic kind of male-dominated profession, and all things women's health have always been the kind of poor relation, and it's not good enough.
No, it's
sorry, rant over.
No, and the education and the training is really important. But I also think it's part of this gender ageism, as well, that if a woman's reproductive life is over, that's it. She's out with the recycling. And I said to you, what I'm writing about at the moment in the next book I'm just doing the edits on is about how women become invisible after the age of 50 and what that's about, and the sort of the misogyny inherent in that, and that I think that menopausal post-reproductive invisibility is sort of all playing into it.
And that's very much what I feel passionately that women shouldn't become invisible at 50. Everything I'm trying to do at Noon is about changing the narrative about that, because it's just a story that's told. It's not true. And it's also not true if you look at the amazing things that women in their 50s are actually doing and are capable of. So I think the antidote is to tell lots more of those stories and to start a much more positive conversation, which isn't just about menopause, but it's about why you need to feel better physically so that you can get on and have a fantastic life and do loads of great things. I mean, I just think that there's a real shift in perspective that's required, and we have to do that. No one's going to do that for us.
No, absolutely. And it's one of the things I've really loved about entering the world of fiction, which is very new to me, and entering it at sort of midlife. But I have loved, in some ways, the lack of ageism in fiction. Like there's wonderful Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Gamus.
I've just finished reading that. That's brilliant. She's coming on to do the Noon book club later in the year. That's a real treat coming up, everybody.
So many, so many of these, and I love being part of that. I love sort of seeing that in fiction, and I really sort of applaud that. More of that, please.
Yes, and I think more of what you're saying about kind of quirky women. I mean, I loved one of the things I loved about us not knowing. We'll get back onto Dot, everyone, I promise, and I can see the stuff on the chat. But one of the things I really loved about her was the sense that you didn't exactly pin her down in a way. I've got a friend who's a drama producer, and he was used to say, he'd go into meetings and they go, "I see a woman about 30, about 35, maybe 36, a size 8, brown hair." You're just like, oh, please, yeah. I'm bored already. So they want to know about lots of people asking about the travel books and the kind of the matching of the kind of the travel books. So tell us a bit about, you've obviously traveled pretty widely yourself if you've been putting on all these curious theatre shows in different places around the world. So tell us a bit about the matching and your travel.
So I have been fortunate to travel, and I think it's just one of the best things to do. I mean, it's in terms of how we learn about the world that we live in, if in whatever way possible. And I particularly like traveling through doing gigs, like going to India and ending up on at the Centre for Biological Sciences in Bangalore, working with scientists on smell, so entering a place with a different kind of invitation, a different kind of way of being there, and then who you meet because of that invitation. So that I love that, and I love performing in different places. But one of the things in Lost Property is that really gets left behind is people leave their travel guides particularly on the Piccadilly line that goes all the way to Heathrow. That's just, if you want a free travel guide, you'd pop on there and get one, because it's almost like a sort of a recycling. People leave them on the way back. So there were lots of them in Lost Property. So I love the idea that Dot she used to travel, and now she's sort of immobilized in her life because of this loss. So what she does instead is that she collects all these travel guides that get left behind, that no one comes for. And then when she gets like 2 copies of 24 Hours in Rome, or a week in Seville, she sort of has started this exchange. She calls it her travel exchange program, and it's almost like a homeopathic thing that she does. So she goes down into the Lost Property basement, and there'll be a raincoat there that's still waiting for its owner to collect it. And she looks at it and she sort of takes in the particular tie of the belt and the particular hunch of the shoulders, and she sort of diagnoses it, and she thinks, I think 48 hours in Amsterdam is what you need here. So she slips it into the pocket, and and of course in those travel guides there's all the lovely marginalia. There's the things with the hearts and the things with don't go here. So I love all of that. So I've just sort of woven that in, partly because I just love the idea of Dot doing that. And would somebody then take the invitation? Would somebody find, a week in Rome in their bag, handed back to them, and think, well, I've got some time coming up. What, so the idea that they would follow through, and that she could have that sort of agency.
And that links back to your whole thing about paying attention, doesn't it? So it's kind of also, has she got it right? Because she doesn't do it randomly. She thinks, from the fact that they've got a leather purse and or whatever, they might, they're obviously elegant in this way, they might like a weekend in Paris or something. It's part of that detective work, isn't it, that she's thinking about all the time.
It is her. She looks for the clues, and she's very good at looking for the clues, and there is a mystery woven through the book, because who doesn't like a bit of mystery? And also I wanted some humor, because I think what's really important if you're writing about loss, obviously it's the book goes to some sort of painful places, of course it does, but it also has I hope, and I wanted there to be a lot of pleasure and a lot of joy, and a lot of humor. So a lot of times that we're laughing with Dot, I hope, not at her, and that there is a lot of joy and there's a lot of humor in it. And I've always liked that. I love an encounter where sorrow is pressed up close to joy. I love that in making theatre work, and I love that in writing Lost Property, and I love writers who do that. You had the lovely Erica Waller on last month.
She was fantastic. We're going to do some noon coming up. We are sorting out these noon walks. We're going to go and do one down in Rossingdean with her, with cake and dogs, for those who have them.
Who wouldn't want to go on a walk with that woman?
With Erica, yeah.
Yes, well, she is brilliant at doing that. So you are there and you are just snorting with laughter. And then on the next page, you're sort of sucker punched. And I love that in a book. I love that encounter. And Erica Waller does it so well. And so...
and so do you. Everyone on the chat saying that they're saying so much humour. They really love it. It was really funny, and I think they're also saying that they learnt so much about it. And I really love the imagination at the end of putting all those bits from those guidebooks on the wall in the dementia hospital. I hope that they do that. I mean, if they don't, you should be going around dementia hospitals getting to do that. So I love the idea that people could think about all the places that they went, and that it's all about what might refire those kind of neuronal those kind of neuron pathways, isn't it? What might kind of bring back a memory for people with dementia. Then we've got lots of questions on here. They're being very, very specific. So they want to know about what happened to her first love in France, and also is she a lesbian
She's
or maybe non-binary, or bi, or
I think she's fluid. I think she's like, oh, you know, it's like sort of so many.
Because Emile
yeah.
is slightly. When I would look back, I thought, oh well, maybe it was Emile, and I was just being too. My unconscious bias was assuming it was a man when it wasn't.
So Dot is fluid, and I really wanted, you know, that's sort of the character I would. Again, I didn't want to label her. I really wanted you just to find out who she was. But she's fluid. But Emile is a chap. But there are other moments in the book where she's open to other invitations. So yeah. Sorry, what was the question about? I have to put my spectacles.
What happened to her first love?
Oh, so what happened to her first love was it. So we find out that because of the tragedy in her life, it was something that she sort of closed down. So her first love was, she finished it all because she was so consumed by this tragedy, the loss that had happened in her life.
Yeah, I got that from the, but we kind of wonder, so she basically shut down. And was Emile meant to be was it a man or a woman, or did you not really know?
It was a man. He was a man.
Okay. And the other one they wanted to know was, it's interesting when you're so interested in stuff and kind of stuff as a kind of memory portal, that actually in the end Dot gives all her, very good point made by very clever point made by somebody on the chat, not mine, that actually Dot gives all her stuff away at the end. The stuff, her dad's stuff's gone to the dementia home, you know, that she actually ends up traveling very light, doesn't she? She's a kind of rolling stone gathering no moss.
Yeah, she is, because I think she's been weighed down, I think, and that she, or in the story, not to give things away to people that are interested to read it but haven't yet, she is sort of really literally and metaphorically weighed down by loss and by the sort of lost objects and everything that's in lost property sort of sinking into the sort of the tomb of, you know, sort of underneath Baker Street. And so I think she is weighed down by objects in that way. And
so she's kind of had her fill of objects by then.
And at the end, she is about people and she's about place, and she goes back to what she has always loved, to the woman that, you know, because this is a story of finding oneself, and it was also really important to me that Dot finds herself. She isn't found, and she does the work, and it's a hard journey she goes on, but she does find herself, and she goes on to a life that is about people and place. Objects.
Yeah, and she kind of moves through. I think I really like that about it. There's some the kind of darker element to this is the attack, and you don't. I mean, I actually quite like the way that you dealt with the attack, because in some ways it kind of, although it's obviously appalling, it wasn't the worst thing that had happened to her, was it? Although I suppose it does precipitate a crisis. But someone was saying that the attack and the aftermath, they thought kind of maybe weren't as primary as you might expect.
Yeah, I think I wanted this sense of layering, and there is a sort of a layering of things that happen to her, and that is absolutely one of them. And it's also really important that we know that is going to be addressed, so that it's not just left that we know that she is going to go back and there is going to be a sort of a punishment for that crime. But that is not the central driver of the story. But it is something that was part of her life, is something that I wanted to write about in the book, and is this sort of escalation of things that are taken away from her.
Yes. People are saying on here they love the description of the umbrellas as if they were birds. I love that, and the kind of like tropical birds kind of there, and the black ones on the top like crows. And I thought that was really, really good. And lots of people saying that they think they really love the sisters' relationship, and that it reminded them of the sisters in Fleabag. I think it just reminds me of all sisters ever. Really.
I know. I love that.
There's always a bit of a
No, I love that. I love the sisters' relationship. And I think one of the things that the story is about, it's about love, and it's about loss being the price we pay for love. But it's also about forgiveness, and it's also about family. And I think even more than romantic love, the book is about family love.
Yes.
And it's about as well, you know, those things that we can sit next to our sister every mealtime for all those years, you know, we can know all these things about her, when she started shaving her legs, you know, all of this, and yet these family secrets, these stories that we make up for ourselves within families, and sort of truths that we reveal and conceal. And so there's a sort of a central part of the book that is really about that is about being known and being seen, and truth, secrets and lies, I suppose, within family.
Yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it, that actually the kind of the complexity of relationships with one's siblings, also, so that you can feel that maybe they're being snooty or annoying to you, and actually they're trying to be loving, or they're trying to do what they think is best for you, but they don't ever. And I love the way you describe them, people not kind of coming out and saying it. So these kind of terrible kind of cross wires across kind of decades.
Yeah.
And then, and I also thought it was very realistic, kind of you know, the stuff at the mum, where they were with the mum, I'm not going to try and give away the plot, where they'd end up lying in the field or having been chased by the bull, and that kind of catharsis. And I think it's so true that often in real, like, kind of terrible grief, you get that act. I mean, like you said, the sorrow and the joy, often in those kind of terrible moments, you get that incredible hysterical laughter. I mean, just like the worst kind of giggles ever. But often I think it's a huge release, isn't it? It's a kind of way of dealing with. I mean, it's so appalling. Sometimes the only thing to do is laugh, or some kind of ridiculously, like, stupid thing happens in the middle of something incredibly serious, and it's almost as if, as human beings, sometimes you kind of need to laugh. You kind of can't. It just can't be all in that kind of grim register, even when things are really terrible.
No, absolutely. And you know, like I've played a little bit in the book with, like, loss of inhibition, you know, so there's this moment where they are just hysterical, the two of them, because of all the tension and all the rest of it. But there's also a moment where Dot's in a Camden line dancing bar, you know, and it's just,
I love that. Yeah, that's,
you know, and I love those just sort of giving over, surrendering moments, you know. And I think we need, you know, I think
we need more.
I think this time, this sort of Queen age, is all about taking those moments and really about that sort of giving over, and that just release of just loss of inhibition, I think, can be so liberating and revolutionary, you know, in the same way that female laughter, I think, is revolutionary.
I completely agree. And I think also doing some stuff that you haven't done before, that you haven't done for a while. Or when we do the noon retreats after breakfast every morning, we all do a crazy dance. Liz, who runs them with me, has the most bizarre kind of hilarious pop taste. So we'd end up doing, like, you know, kind of What a Feeling, everyone like kind of going crazy in the field after breakfast. And to begin with, on the first morning, if we go, right, we're all going to dance after breakfast, and everyone looks at you like going, there's absolutely no way I'm going to dance. So it's okay, you could do it to begin with your eyes shut, and then after about 20 seconds, all their eyes are open and the inhibitions are gone, and then from then on they can't get enough of the dancing.
No, see, and I think that is one of the gifts that we have to really grab with both hands at this moment in our lives, you know, that it's about just not giving a fuck. And I've heard so many women really talk about that. That's the liberation of this moment. You know, there's a lot of things that we have to, you know, deal with and hold. But in this moment of change, that there is that extraordinary sort of revolutionary liberation of not caring so much, and how freeing that can be. And really, you know, I mean, you know, it's not caring
it's not kind of caring what people think, or if you make a fool of yourself. And I think it's also something about a different kind of relationship with the people that you hang out with. It was really interesting. I was talking to a friend the other day, and she was talking about, and there's a sense with the people that you really love, by the time you get to this point, that there's a total transparency in the relationships that you really value. You're not in any way trying to be anything other than entirely who you are, and that kind of exchange of a total kind of nakedness on both sides, where none of you are trying to do any kind of pretense. And I think that there's a kind of reality in that kind of nakedness, and the hilarity that can ensue, and the honesty, the kind of rawness of how you can allow yourself to be with people, which I think maybe when you're younger, you're kind of, you know, you're more self-conscious. And I really value that. I kind of increasingly feel the only people I really want to spend kind of time with other people where I can be entirely myself, and if I can't be, then I don't really want to be there. She was talking about some kind of supper parties as being a bit like, she has a shorthand for it of lasagna, which you kind of know is like slightly polite kind of barbed conversation where you don't, you kind of quite like them, but there's so much not being said and it's just all becomes too tiring. And I think that that's one of the key thing about midlife, is that maybe one sloughs off some of those characters.
Absolutely, sloughs off some of that, and really that focus on friendship. I mean, my friends have always been important to me, but there is something about this moment, and maybe about going through the last 2 years, and maybe looking at what's ahead as we're all dealing with sort of parental losses in different ways. This community of friends, particularly female friends, this extraordinary strength, this thrumming, pounding of female friendship, and what it is, and how extraordinarily important my friends have always been, but are even more so. There's something really sort of vibrant and
I think that's really true. I also think that there are friendships that don't last the course at this point. I mean, I know from speaking to a lot of the women and from my own life that there are some who have traveled with you a long way who you lose at about this time, not because they die, but just because things don't work anymore. And that can be really sad, but I think it's also a part of this stage. Particularly, I think if you shift into a new phase, that not everybody will come with you.
Completely.
I think that that's something that's quite kind of unexplored, and the kind of the pain of that. I think there's a lot of stuff around about the amazingness of friendship, and I think that that's all really true. But I also think that there are some difficult things in those friendships, like there are with sisters, can be, which is also rich territory. You were talking, and the other one, I mean, I was writing down, I was writing myself some silly notes when I'm going to interview someone, and I'd written down suicide, sisters, and self-esteem were kind of three things that really kind of too many years of writing headlines. Of course, the one that we haven't really talked about is suicide, and that sense of what that does in families, and that kind of terrible loss. I've written about this before, and I've know families where a parent has committed suicide, and I think it's really one of the real kind of killer life blows. Is that so? Why were you drawn to writing about that particularly?
Because I was really wanting to explore loss in its sort of most profound and most painful and most. I was really trying to be open to sort of myriad types of loss, and that for me felt incredibly profound, and I didn't know if I could do justice to it, because it's such a fragile, precarious and painful thing to write about.
Someone on the chat saying, I think suicide needs to be talked about, understood, not hidden. And I think that that's really true. I mean, it's part of the reason that I raised it, actually, because it's funny, we've been talking a lot, but it's something, and it's also something that's in Erica Waller's book, Dog Days.
It is.
And it's much more, it's much more prevalent. Probably, all of us know somebody who's had a parent who's become suicidal, or a child, or there's and it's one of those things that's really not kind of talked about. There's still so much shame around it. I think.
Absolutely.
And also I think amazing amount of anger surrounds it. I come from a family of psychoanalysts and psychotherapists, so I kind of hear this stuff being discussed a lot, and I think the angriness wrapped up in suicide is really toxic and also not talked about very much.
Absolutely. No, it suctions so many extraordinary, powerful, disparate emotions of anger and grief and betrayal, and it is so absolutely something that we need to have a language for, have more conversation and dialogue about. And I found it really challenging to write it, but it felt important to me for this book to write it, and that was the story that presented itself.
How do you? I'm interested. So you said when you started writing this, you hadn't had a parent with Alzheimer's, and you're not saying whether suicide is something that you know about. If you're writing about something where it's kind of that massive, and also, you know, people reading it will have gone through. What kind of research do you do? Do you go and talk to people? I mean, you obviously went to the Lost Property Office, but is that how much actual kind of research do you do to make sure that you're getting it right?
Yeah, so I had experience of people who had taken their own lives, sort of big personal experience of that. With the dementia, it was something that I didn't have close experience with, but I felt I needed to really educate myself about. So I read Wendy Mitchell's book. I talked to people who were willing to talk to me about their parents who had dementia. I read more medical texts about it. But I think also it's about empathy. I think it was so much of, you know, what it is when one writes. It's about not necessarily having experienced it, but it is about feeling empathy. It is about paying attention. It is about how one might imagine how that feels. And so I think a lot of it comes from that as well, just feeling the empathy and paying attention and listening.
I'm really sorry. I became momentarily distracted then, and I've written something completely bizarre in the chat, which is so weird. I'm going to have to say, somebody had said that they hadn't received the book, and I was saying you should have received the book when you signed up for the thing, and then it's got mangled because I'm not wearing my glasses, which is a really stupid midlife rookie error. And what I was trying to say, someone said 3 former work colleagues had committed suicide, and I was trying to say I'm really sorry to hear about that. That was what that message was meant to say. And the thing about the book was meant to be totally other, so I'm sorry if that came out a bit garbled, and I'm really, really sorry to hear that you had 3 former work colleagues commit suicide. That's terrible. And there is a lot of it around. I also had a colleague who committed suicide, and what's awful is just that guilt. Even if you haven't really had, even if you weren't particularly close to them, it's just that kind of, you know, horrible guilt about what you might have done, which might have made a difference. And I think that people, you know, a lot of people have that when somebody dies anyway, but I think with suicide that's massively amped up. Really difficult. And someone was saying that it's a really interesting link, but also again back to paying attention, because there's something in that, isn't there, the kind of that maybe with Dot, the need to pay attention so minutely to other people's loss, it is also wrapped up with her guilt about feeling that she wasn't there for her father.
Absolutely.
And then all that betrayal, of course, and feeling like it was so terribly her fault when actually there were good reasons why she was kind of not in the know.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and what again, that comes back to that thing, that's the stories that we tell ourselves and the stories that we're told, particularly within families, you know, sort of the narratives that we concoct and live with as families. And you know, and then that's one of the things that I think really breathes some air into her relationship with Philippa by the end of the book. And you know, and they really sort of find each other, and Philippa is still Philippa. She's still, you know, she's still going to not be letting the Labour candidate in. But, you know, it was really important to me in writing a book about loss. You also get to write about what's found, you know, and that was also sort of the joy and the pleasure and where some of the humour in the book, and where ultimately I think it is an uplifting book that has earned its place to be an uplifting book, because it has gone there. It has bold-faced, you know, gone to the cold face of these really difficult, really excruciatingly painful situations, but things are found. And you know, whether it's the stuff, you know, the story that's stuffing coming out, being reunited to the child in Over the Lost Property Counter, or whether it's that moment when she reconnects with her mother, or whether it's that moment where her and her sister are lying in a, you know, a field full of shit, you know, just laughing. And that for me was a really important thing for the book to do, and a really pleasurable thing for the book to do, that there is that, you know, that journey of finding oneself, but also all those other little findings and connections that are happening. And
no, I think you do that beautifully. I don't think it's a gloomy book at all. I think it's a very kind of poignant and emotionally finely drawn book, which very much makes you realize that kind of fine balance always between light and shade. And it's often I was interviewing Minnie Driver earlier this week, and she was talking about her mother dying, and that same thing that you describe in the book, of this incredible clarity suddenly near the end. I can remember that with my stepfather. He'd been really ill with bladder cancer, and then suddenly we had this kind of magical night where he seemed kind of better again. And Minnie was talking about her mother, that this kind of magical evening when, having been so ill, she suddenly kind of could eat, and they had this kind of like an enchanted supper, and then the next day she died. And I think that that's really true at the end. And I think that there's it's really, again, it's something that's very important that we pay attention to and that we write about, so that people don't miss it, you know, or they realize that maybe that's what's going on. I think it's really important. I also particularly love the relationship with the mother, and because I also think that this book is also about how family relationships change, and we're often kind of sold a line that you kind of, you know, you have this position in your family as a child, and you know that's what goes on. But also what we all learn as we get to midlife, as you say, that you become the kind of parent to your parent at some point, and that kind of the subtlety of that shift, and then how your relationships with your siblings change, and the fact that we're all fluid and learning and changing and transforming and developing. We're not set in aspect. I think that's an incredibly important thing, part of what we try to do at Noon, and I think that that's a really important part of loss, that in all loss there is the space for renewal or rebirth when you get through it. And that, whereas it's a biblical thing, is that, you know, you're lost, then you know, and then you become found. That there's a kind of that kind of circularity of life, of the kind of dark and shadow. I think you draw beautifully. Erica, Dog Days, Erica Wallet is on the chat. She's saying how brilliantly she thinks you've done the suicide, and how much how sad she was. She said, Dot's love for her father is so well drawn. She made me think about when my dad is not here, and I can't bear to think of it. Thanks. Got a big I've got a lot of fans within the new thing. So it's really interesting in these discussions how lots of the same themes come round, which is about, and what I'm really interested in is that capacity that human beings have to go to suffer a terrible loss, to go to a dark place, and then but to come out of it still with a kind of passion for life. I love the bit when she's in, you know, in the sea. At some point, all of us choose. You have to choose that you're going to go on living in grief, don't you? And in loss.
That's right. Yeah.
You want to talk about that a bit?
Yeah, I mean, I wanted those sort of, you know, redemptive moments, and you know, Dot she has quite a few. It is, you know, it is quite a journey, and I think there are these moments, sort of, they're not exactly epiphanies, but I think definitely with her mother there is like absolutely, you know, as you're saying, the sort of the one narrative that she's always lived with, the sort of love for her father, and the mother, as mothers often do, sort of being in the background, but enabling the whole family to work in a way, and not telling things for the overall sort of health of the family. And that realization at the end, there's one moment just at the end of this photograph that Doctor's always, her and her sister in a wheelbarrow, you know, that feeling when I don't know, you know,
I love that scene. I really love that scene.
Funny thing, isn't it, when you have those wheelbarrow rides? But I remember this wheelbarrow ride with my sister, and there's this photograph with, she assumes, her dad's hand, because it's always, you know, her dad was sort of doing this and he was always playing with her, and then she looks closer and it's her mother's hands, and it's just this sort of sudden recalibration of this moment of the mother sort of being there, and the mother paying attention, and the mother wanting Dot to go off and sort of, you know, live her best life. And so there are these moments of revelation, of findings, of discovery, of sort of redemption, and these moments of choosing. I mean, absolutely choosing life. It's something, it's a line in the piece as well. Mr. Appleby says it, you know, choose life, because there is a choice, and that is ultimately, you know, what she does. You know, she makes that decision and she chooses life, and she, you know, finds herself in that way.
But I think it's a really important thing to remember when one is kind of down, you know, you get a kind of down kind of, you know, turn, or you get a big kind of life blow, and we, you know, we've certainly had some of those by the time we get to this point, that the sun does come out again. I mean, that's the thing, is that you walk through a kind of really dark, shadowy place, but you know, within that, someone said to me, really a kind of that real kind of darkest hour is just before dawn kind of moment. There's an amazing romantic painting of a tree, which is which looks like it's dying. When you look at the picture, it looks like everything's dead. But actually, when you look closely, you realise that the tree looks completely bare, but actually the buds are just about to kind of come out again. And I love that. I love that as a metaphor, that actually in that kind of really darkest kind of bit of the winter, just before the spring is come, it's actually when all the seeds are beginning to sprout massively off underground, and they're coming back. And I think that that's a good thing to hang on to.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that I have really that I draw a lot of sucker from is having intergenerational relationships. It's like I have really good friends that are in their 70s, and how much they've received wisdom, how much sort of those life lessons. I have this wonderful performance artist called Lois Weaver who lives in New York, and she's in her 70s, and she talks about, you know, the only way home is through the show, and she says that because the only way to make a piece of show is, you know, to make a piece of work is to make a piece of work, but it is also the only way to live life is living life, you know, is sort of, and I like that, and I really thought about that when I was sort of writing my second book, you know, through lockdown, and I'm writing it about the menopause through menopause, you know, so I'm slapping on my patches and I'm trying to get my words around the right way.
Yeah.
And, you know, thinking the only way through the book, through the story, is to write the story, you know, and just that sense of continuum. But that intergenerational relationships, and I love that, and I you know, I love that as sort of being a teacher as well. I love that connection with, you know, younger people. I love that sort of working with students, but I love having friends who are older, and that sort of, you know, that those shared wisdoms about life and about what's coming for us, and about, you know, how to deal, how to ready ourselves, you know.
Yeah, when I was going through my own really dark time, I went out to Jamaica to see a friend, and I'd taken him out a whole load of books, and one of the books that I'd taken out for his 3-year-old son was We're Going on a Bear Hunt. And of course I got there with all these books. The first thing I had to do was read them all, so I could, you know, the selfish giant kind of, you know, innocent. We got to bear hunt, it's like, can't go over it, can't go under it, got to go through it. Which is a slightly more childish way of putting your, you know, your performance dancer's maxim, but I think it's really true. You just have to kind of keep struggling through, and you come out the other end, and it gets better, and at some point the sun comes out.
Exactly. Yeah, you got to roll up your sleeves and get through that show. Yeah.
Now, I could go on talking to you forever, Helen, but it's actually 8:10, so I'm going to let you I'm going to let you go. And I just wanted to thank all of you who've been on the call so much for your wonderful comments and appreciation. And of course, a huge thank you to Helen for coming and being such a wonderful guest, reading so beautifully, speaking so beautifully. We're really, really grateful.
It's such a joy. Thank you so much. And thank you for all the people that have come and made these wonderful comments and suggestions, and for Noon as well. I love this book club and the other work that you do. I just think what a fantastic thing to have, really. And, you know, I think just really potent, and really what a beautiful place to come.
Oh, thank you so much. We really appreciate your support, and I really do think it's a lovely book. I mean, I've been so amazed that someone said on the chat that's wonderful to read these kind of accounts of such kind of rich women, and I do think that Transworld, who are our very lovely sponsors, have been are on an amazingly rich scene of really fantastic books by women in midlife, and of course they also published the Marion Seacart Authority Gap, which I love. So I just wanted to say thank you so much, Helen. It's such a lovely, lovely book. Congratulations. I can't wait to read your next one. And will you come back and talk to us about that? Maybe, you know, write something for Noon.
I would love to.
When you do. And thank you so much. Thank you coming. And thank you, Hannah. I can see you there from Transworld. We really appreciate your support for the book club. And if you didn't get your book, if you email us, so if you email hello@inherspace.co.uk, we will sort it out tomorrow, and we'll get onto the publishers and send them to you. I don't know, there seem to be a few more glitches on that than usual. My book took a bit of a while to come, actually. Usually they come a bit quicker, so maybe it was into the warehouse. But anyway, thank you so much, all of you, for joining us. There's been a thread in the chat about, we're talking about queenagers, which is my new kind of coining for midlife. I'm going to have some t-shirts made saying proud to be a queenager, if anyone wants them. They'll be coming soon. There was someone here saying, well, I'm in my 60s, am I what am I? And they were saying that she's a cronager, and then someone else said they're a boomager. So maybe we can have a whole raft of these. But thanks everyone for your comments, and thanks for coming. It's always a joy to do these sessions, and thanks so much, Helen. And if you haven't read Lost Property yet, get in touch with us and we'll make sure that you get your copy. And it's brilliant, and we'll look forward to your next book. Thanks so much for joining.
Thank you.